Official field reports. Unedited camera footage. Pure justice. You are watching Bodycam incident reports.
Sir, last warning. Stand up and show me your ID or you're going in cuffs.
No, officer. You have no reasonable suspicion. Sitting here is not a crime.
You're refusing a lawful order.
Then articulate the crime, because right now, you're the one breaking the law.
Turn around, now.
If you touch me, you own everything that happens next.
Officer Kyle Braden, 29 years old and eager to prove his proactive policing stance, did not like the tone of the man sitting on the concrete bench. To Braden, the man looked like a vagrant wearing a faded olive green field jacket, comfortable cargo pants, and a worn baseball cap pulled low against the midday sun. He was sitting too still, staring too intently at the water of the municipal fountain in the center of the downtown plaza. Braden assumed the man was homeless, perhaps intoxicated and definitely out of place in the revitalized business district. But the man, Marcus Thorne, was neither homeless nor intoxicated. He was 62 years old, a homeowner in the historic district, and he was currently enjoying the rhythmic sound of the water which helped manage the tinnitus he had lived with for 30 years. He hadn't moved an inch since Braden approached him. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't reached for anything. He simply sat there radiating a kind of calm that Braden mistook for defiance. "Sir, I'm going to go hands-on if you don't comply." Braden warned, his hand drifting to the taser on his belt. The heavy black utility belt creaked as he shifted his stance, trying to intimidate the older man. "That would be a mistake, son," Thorne said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and steady. It wasn't the voice of someone afraid of the police. It was the voice of someone who had given orders to men much tougher than Kyle Braden. "I haven't committed a crime. I haven't broken any municipal code. I am enjoying the sunshine." "We had a call," Braden lied. There was no call. He had just seen a black man in old clothes sitting in a high-rent district and decided to investigate. A call about a suspicious individual casing businesses. You fit the description. The description was a black man sitting down, Thorne asked, finally tilting his head up to look Braden in the eye. "That's not a description of a suspect, officer. That's a demographic." "Let me see your ID," Braden snapped. "No." "What did you say to me?" "I said no. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to provide identification. It's a nice day. Why don't you go patrol somewhere that actually needs you?" Braden's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his uniform. He wasn't used to people knowing the law better than he did. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. "Before we see how Officer Braden destroys his entire career in the next 10 minutes, I need you to do something for me. Stop and think about how you would react if an armed agent of the state demanded your papers while you were minding your own business. Would you comply? Or would you stand your ground? Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, your state, your city, and type freedom if you believe the Constitution still matters in this country. And if you support holding bad cops accountable, hit that subscribe button right now. You are not going to believe who this man actually is." The plaza was starting to fill up with the lunch rush. Secretaries, lawyers, and construction workers were pausing, sandwiches in hand, watching the scene unfold. A young woman in a business suit stopped about 20 feet away and held up her phone. She started recording. Thorne noticed her and gave a barely perceptible nod. "You're making this difficult," Braden said, stepping into Thorne's personal space. "I'm making this constitutional," Thorne corrected. "You are the one making it difficult. Last chance, ID or handcuffs. Make your choice, officer, but make sure you're ready for the paperwork that comes with it." Officer Braden looked at the growing crowd. He saw the phones pointed at him. In his mind, backing down now would look like weakness. It would look like he had lost control of the situation. He had been on the force for 6 years, and he had learned the wrong lessons from the wrong veterans. He believed that respect was something you demanded, not something you earned. "Stand up and turn around." Braden barked, unlatching the retention strap on his holster, though he didn't draw the weapon. He kept his hand resting on it, a threat display. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. "Officer, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are currently detaining me. Under Terry versus Ohio, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Looking suspicious is not a crime. Sitting on a bench is not a crime. If you put your hands on me, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. Do you understand that?" "I don't need a law lecture from a vagrant," Braden sneered. "I'm detaining you for loitering and disorderly conduct." "Disorderly?" Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't used profanity. I haven't blocked pedestrian traffic. The only person creating disorder here is you. You are escalating a non-event into a civil rights violation. You're refusing to identify during an investigation." Braden countered, reciting a line he had used 100 times to bully compliance out of teenagers. Heibel versus 6th Judicial District Court. Thorne cited the case law as effortlessly as if he were ordering coffee. State statutes requiring identification only apply if the stop itself is lawful. Your stop is based on a hunch, not facts. Therefore, the stop is unlawful and I have no duty to identify myself. You are fishing officer, and you're about to catch a shark. The woman recording the video stepped a little closer. "He's right, officer," she called out. "He's just sitting there. Leave him alone." "Back up!" Braden yelled, pointing a finger at the woman. "Do not interfere with police business." "She's 20 feet away, officer," Thorne said calmly. "She has a First Amendment right to record public officials in the course of their duties. Glick versus Cuniff. You really need to brush up on your case law before you go out on patrol." Braden had heard enough. This man, this arrogant, disheveled man, was embarrassing him. Braden didn't see a citizen exercising his rights. He saw a nail that needed hammering. He convinced himself that the man must be wanted. Why else would he be so protective of his ID? He probably had a warrant. Maybe he was a fugitive. Braden's bias filled in the gaps where evidence should have been. "I'm done talking," Braden said. He lunged forward, grabbing Thorne's left arm. Thorne didn't pull away, but his body went rigid. "I do not consent to this search or seizure," he stated loudly, ensuring the phone microphones picked it up. "I am not resisting, but I am not consenting." "Stop tensing up," Braden shouted, twisting Thorne's arm behind his back with unnecessary force. "I have a rotator cuff injury from service," Thorne said, through gritted teeth, the pain flaring up immediately. "If you wrench that arm, you will cause permanent damage." "Then you should have showed me your ID," Braden retorted, shoving Thorne's chest against the rough concrete of the fountain wall. "Officer," Thorne said, his face pressed against the stone, "you are making a career-ending mistake. I am giving you one last chance to walk away. Release me, apologize, and we can call this a misunderstanding." "You're under arrest," Braden announced, pulling his handcuffs from their case. "For what crime?" Thorne asked. "Obstruction of justice," Braden said, snapping the first cuff onto Thorne's left wrist. "There it is," Thorne whispered to himself. "The catch-all charge for a cop with a bruised ego." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was distinct. Click, click, click. It was a sound that usually signaled the end of a confrontation, the moment when police authority became absolute. But in this case, it was the sound of a fuse being lit on a stick of dynamite. Officer Braden yanked Thorne's right arm back. Thorne winced a sharp intake of breath, his only sign of pain as the metal bit into his wrists. Braden didn't bother checking for spacing. He didn't double-lock the cuffs. He just wanted this man secured and humiliated. "You're hurting him," the woman filming screamed. "He told you he has an injury. Step back or you're next." Braden threatened the crowd. By now, 15 or 20 people had gathered. They weren't just watching, they were judging. And the verdict wasn't going in Braden's favor. Braden patted Thorne down roughly. He reached into Thorne's back pocket and pulled out a slim black leather wallet. "Now we'll see who you are," Braden muttered triumphantly. "That is an illegal search." Thorne stated, his voice tight with pain but still commanded. "You have arrested me for obstruction, which is a secondary charge. You never established the primary crime. The search incident to arrest is fruit of the poisonous tree. Nothing you find in there is admissible, but everything you find is going to scare the hell out of you." Braden didn't open the wallet immediately. He shoved it into his own pocket, wanting to savor the reveal at the station. He wanted to process this guy, throw him in a holding cell, and let him think about respect for a few hours. "Let's go," Braden said, grabbing Thorne by the bicep and marching him toward the patrol car parked illegally on the curb. Thorne walked with dignity. He didn't shuffle. He didn't hang his head. He walked with the upright posture of a man who had marched in formation for 30 years. He looked at the camera as he passed the woman recording. "Thank you, ma'am," Thorne said to her. "Please don't stop recording until we leave." "I got you," she promised. "I'm posting this right now." Braden opened the back door of his cruiser and shoved Thorne inside. The back of a police interceptor is designed to be uncomfortable. The hard plastic seat forces the body into an unnatural position, especially with hands cuffed behind the back. Thorne had to twist his torso to fit his legs in. Braden slammed the door shut, sealing Thorne inside the plexiglass cage. Braden walked around to the driver's side. He paused to glare at the crowd one last time. "Show's over," he yelled. "Go about your business." "You should be ashamed of yourself," an older man in a construction vest yelled back. He wasn't doing anything. Braden got into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The interior smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and sweat. He took a deep breath, his adrenaline still pumping. He felt good. He felt powerful. He had taken a problem off the street. He looked in the rearview mirror. Thorne was sitting perfectly still, staring right at the back of Braden's head. Thorne's eyes weren't angry. They were calculating. It was the look a predator gives prey before the strike. "Comfortable back there," Braden taunted. "Comfort is irrelevant, officer," Thorne replied. "What matters now is documentation. I hope your body camera is active. I hope your dash cam is rolling. Because I'm going to subpoena every second of data this vehicle produces." "You talk a lot for a guy in cuffs," Braden laughed, putting the car in gear. "And you think very little for a man with a badge," Thorne countered. Braden pulled away from the curb, hitting the lights, but not the siren. He wanted to get this guy to the precinct fast. He had a nagging feeling in the back of his mind, a tiny voice telling him that the man's confidence was too real. Most people begged. Most people cried. Most people got angry and shouted obscenities. Thorne did none of that. He was behaving like he was the one in charge, even from the back seat. As they drove, Braden's hand brushed against the wallet in his pocket. He was tempted to look at it while driving, but he decided to wait. He wanted to do it in front of the guys at the station. He wanted to show them the sovereign citizen nut job he had just brought in. He had no idea that the drive to the station was the last time he would ever drive a police vehicle. The drive to the 4th Precinct took 12 minutes. For Officer Braden, it was a victory lap. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, rehearsing how he would write the report. Subject was belligerent, refused lawful order, suspected casing of high-value retail targets. He could spin it. He always spun it. In the back seat, Marcus Thorne closed his eyes and practiced tactical breathing. In for 4 hold, for 4, out for 4. He needed to lower his heart rate. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, throbbing fire radiating down to his elbow. He knew the injury well. He had earned it in the Persian Gulf in 1991, pulling a pilot out of a burning wreckage. The VA had rebuilt the shoulder, but it wasn't designed to be wrenched behind his back by an overzealous patrolman. Thorne didn't speak again. He knew the value of silence. In the military, he had learned that information was ammunition. He wasn't going to give Braden any more ammo. He was just going to let the officer dig the hole deeper. Braden kept glancing in the mirror, expecting Thorne to start complaining or bargaining. The silence unnerved him more than the insults would have. "You got a name, or are you going to make me wait?" Braden asked. Silence. "Suit yourself. We'll fingerprint you. We'll find out who you are. Probably got a long sheet, huh? That's why you didn't want to show ID. Outstanding warrants." Silence. Braden turned up the radio to drown out the quiet. He was starting to sweat again. Why was the guy so calm? Even the hardened gangbangers usually swore at him by now. This guy sat with the discipline of a statue. They pulled into the sally port of the precinct. The heavy metal gate rolled down behind them, shutting out the sunlight. The artificial hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Braden parked the car and got out. He opened the back door and hauled Thorne out. Thorne stumbled slightly as his legs woke up, but he regained his balance instantly. "Watch your head," Braden said, a mockery of politeness as he guided Thorne toward the booking intake. They walked through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. It was a busy afternoon. 2 other officers were booking a shoplifter. The smell of bleach and old fear hung in the air. Behind the high intake desk sat Sergeant Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran of the force. He was tired, he was close to retirement, and he had zero patience for nonsense. He had seen good cops and bad cops, and he knew Braden was a hothead. "What you got, Braden?" Miller asked, not looking up from his computer screen. "Refusal to ID, obstruction, disorderly," Braden announced proudly. "Guy was loitering at the fountain, acting suspicious, refused to comply." Miller looked up. He saw Thorne. He saw the way Thorne stood, feet shoulder-width apart, chin-up eyes scanning the room. Miller saw the faded military field jacket. He saw the haircut, high and tight gray, but neat. Miller frowned. That's it, he wouldn't show ID. He was belligerent Sarge, causing a scene. Thorne spoke for the first time since entering the building. "Sergeant, I request medical attention for a service-connected shoulder injury aggravated by this officer's use of force, and I request you secure this officer's body camera footage immediately." Miller's eyes narrowed. That wasn't the way a vagrant spoke. That was the way a commanding officer spoke. "Get his property," Miller said to Braden, his voice dropping an octave. Braden pulled the wallet out of his pocket and tossed it onto the counter. "Here. Let's see who the mystery man is." Miller picked up the wallet. It was high-quality leather old, but well cared for. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a standard driver's license. Marcus Aurelius Thorne. The second thing he saw was a folded laminated card. A Department of Defense retired identification. Rank Captain 06, United States Navy. Miller paused. A Navy captain was a big deal. That was equivalent to a full-bird colonel in the Army. That was a serious rank. But then Miller flipped the flap of the wallet. Behind a clear plastic window was another card. It was white with a blue strip. It identified Marcus Thorne as a senior strategic consultant for the Pentagon, with a security clearance level that Miller had only seen in movies, and tucked behind that was a small metal card. It was a replica of a medal something veterans sometimes carried. A silver star. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the cards. He looked at Thorne. He looked at Braden, who was leaning against the counter, smirking. "Braden," Miller whispered. "Yeah, Sarge. Who is he? Some sovereign citizen nut." "Braden, shut up." Miller said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "Uncuff him." "What?" "I said uncuff him. Right now." Miller roared, standing up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. The booking room went silent. The other officers stopped what they were doing. Everyone looked at Sergeant Miller, whose face had gone from pale to a dangerous shade of purple. "Sarge, he's under arrest," Braden protested, confused. "He obstructed..." You enter these codes into the system, Braden, and you'll be lucky if you're working security at a mall by next week. Miller snapped. He walked around the desk, keyring in hand, and approached Thorne himself. Captain Thorne, Miller said, his voice respectful, almost apologetic. I am Sergeant Miller. I served in the Corps 85 to 89. I am removing these cuffs immediately. Thank you, Sergeant, Thorne said calmly. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his hands forward slowly, wincing as he rotated his shoulders. His wrists were red and welting where the metal had dug in. Braden, Miller barked, not taking his eyes off Thorne. Give me your body cam, now. Sarge, I don't understand. Read the damn ID, you moron. Miller shoved the wallet toward Braden. Braden picked up the wallet. He looked at the driver's license. Okay, so he had a house. Big deal. He looked at the military ID. Captain U.S. Navy, retired. He frowned. He didn't know military ranks well. He's a captain, Braden shrugged. So what, he still has to follow the law? 06, Thorne said softly. That means I commanded ships, Officer Braden. I commanded thousands of sailors. I managed budgets larger than this entire city's GDP. And I know the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the U.S. Constitution better than you know the back of your hand. Braden flipped to the next card. Department of Defense, Pentagon Liaison. Braden's throat went dry. And the Silver Star, Miller added, pointing to the metal card. Do you know what that is, Braden? That's for gallantry in action. This man is a war hero. He looked homeless. Braden stammered, his defense crumbling. He was wearing that old jacket. It's a field jacket, Miller spat. It's issued gear. Braden, you profiled a high-ranking federal consultant and a decorated veteran as a vagrant because he was sitting at a fountain. Thorne rubbed his wrists. Sergeant Miller, I want the watch commander down here. Now. And I want the city attorney on the phone. This officer didn't just profile me. He unlawfully detained me, assaulted me, and kidnapped me. I use those words specifically because without probable cause, an arrest is a kidnapping. Braden took a step back. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him. This wasn't a guy he could bully. This wasn't someone who would take a plea deal to go home. This was a man who had literally fought wars. I was following protocol. Braden tried, but his voice was weak. No, Thorne said, turning his gaze on Braden. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You were following your bias. You saw a black man in casual clothes and you assumed criminality. You assumed I was nobody. You assumed I couldn't fight back. Thorne stepped closer to Braden. You assumed wrong. Sarge, call the captain, Miller instructed the dispatch officer. Tell him it's a code red situation in booking. Tell him we have a VIP in custody erroneously. I'm not a VIP, Sergeant, Thorne corrected gently. I'm a citizen. That should have been enough. The doors to the booking area swung open. Captain Reynolds, the precinct commander, walked in. He looked annoyed at being disturbed, but when he saw Marcus Thorne standing there rubbing his wrists, and Sergeant Miller looking like he was about to have a stroke, his expression changed instantly. Captain Reynolds knew Marcus Thorne. They served on the Veterans Affairs Civic Board together. Marcus, Reynolds said, stopping in his tracks. What the hell is going on? Hello, David, Thorne said. Your officer here decided that sitting at a fountain while black is a crime in this city. Reynolds looked at Braden. The look was not one of anger. It was one of absolute devastation. It was the look a father gives a child who has just burned down the house. Braden, Reynolds said quietly. In my office. Now. Give your badge and gun to Sergeant Miller. The sound of Officer Braden placing his gun and badge on the counter was the loudest sound in the room. Clack, clack. He looked stripped naked without the symbols of his authority. He walked past Thorne's eyes on the floor and disappeared into the captain's office. Captain Reynolds turned to Thorne. "Marcus, I can't even find the words. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you need a medic?" "I'll see my own doctor, David," Thorne said. "But we need to handle the procedural matters right now." "Of course. We'll drop all charges, obviously. It's a misunderstanding. I'll drive you home myself." "No." Thorne raised a hand. "You're not dropping the charges because of a misunderstanding. You're dropping them because they were fabricated. And I'm not going home yet. I want a copy of the booking log before it's deleted. I want the intake form. I want a preservation letter signed by you guaranteeing that Braden's body cam, dash cam, and the precinct security footage are locked down." Reynolds sighed. He knew what this was. This was the prelude to a lawsuit. "Marcus, come on. We can handle this internally. Braden is done. I promise you that. We don't need to make this a federal case." "It already is a federal case," Thorne said. "Violation of civil rights under color of law. Title 42, Section 1983. You know the code, David." "Think about the department," Reynolds pleaded softly. "We're trying to rebuild trust." "That is exactly why I'm doing this," Thorne replied. "You don't build trust by sweeping this under the rug. You build trust by showing the public that when your officers mess up, they face the same music as the rest of us. If I had been a 19-year-old kid with no resources, I'd be in a cell right now. I'd be taking a plea deal for disorderly conduct just to get out. I'd have a record. I'd lose my job." Thorne pointed to the door where Braden had exited. He didn't care about any of that. He wanted to dominate. He wanted to hurt. And he did it because he thought he was untouchable. Reynolds nodded slowly. He knew Thorne was right. "Okay. I'll get the paperwork. I'll sign the preservation order. And I want my phone," Thorne said. "I need to call my attorney." "Who's your attorney?" Reynolds asked, dreading the answer. "Alan Dershowitz's former partner," Thorne said. "He specializes in excessive force cases." Reynolds winced. "Right. Okay, here's your phone." Thorne took the phone. He saw a notification. The video from the woman in the park had been posted on Twitter/X. It had been up for 45 minutes. "David," Thorne said, holding up the screen, "you might want to call the mayor. This video already has 50,000 views." Reynolds looked at the screen. The caption read, "San Diego police assault and arrest elderly black veteran for sitting on a bench. Hashtag police brutality. Hashtag veterans." "Oh no," Reynolds whispered. "The train has left the station," Thorne said. "Now we see where it crashes." Reynolds went into his office to deal with Braden. Thorne stood in the booking room surrounded by officers who wouldn't meet his eyes. He wasn't angry anymore. He was on a mission. He had served his country overseas defending freedom. Now he was serving his community right here defending the same thing. By the time Marcus Thorne got home that evening, the video had 2 million views. By the next morning, it was on Good Morning America. The visual was undeniable. A calm, older black man sitting peacefully contrasted with a young, aggressive white officer escalating the situation for absolutely no reason. The internet detectives went to work. They identified Braden within hours. They found his old social media posts, which were filled with aggressive sheepdog rhetoric and complaints about soft-on-crime policies. But the real damage came from the lawsuit filed 3 days later. Thorne's lawyer didn't hold back. The complaint was 40 pages long. It detailed every constitutional violation, the unlawful stop, the refusal to accept the lack of reasonable suspicion, the excessive force used on a disabled veteran, the false arrest. But the lawsuit also dug into Braden's history. It turned out this wasn't an isolated incident. Braden had 5 previous complaints for aggressive conduct. 4 of them were against minority men. 1 was against a Hispanic Gulf War veteran. All of them had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded or within policy. The city attorney, A woman named Sarah Jenkins sat in a conference room with the police chief and watched the body cam footage. She watched Braden taunt Thorne in the car. She watched the arrest. "We can't defend this," Jenkins said, tossing the file onto the table. "He detained a man for sitting. The man cited the correct case law and the officer arrested him out of spite. And the victim is a Navy captain with a Silver Star. Jurors will hate us. They will give him whatever number he asks for. We have to support our officers," the union rep tried to argue. "We support officers who follow the law," Jenkins shot back. "Braden went rogue. He didn't have reasonable suspicion. He admitted it on camera. He said, 'We had a call, but dispatch logs show no call.' He lied. That's Brady material. He's finished as a witness in any court. We have to settle." The media pressure was suffocating. Veterans groups were protesting outside the precinct. The NAACP issued a blistering statement. The Pentagon even released a generic statement about expecting our service members and veterans to be treated with dignity. The headline on the local paper read, "Hero in Handcuffs, How SDPD Profiled a Captain." The city of San Diego couldn't make it go away. They offered $500,000. Thorne rejected it. They offered $750,000. Thorne rejected it. "It's not about the money," Thorne told the press on the courthouse steps. "It's about the cost. If it's cheap to violate rights, they'll keep doing it. It has to be expensive. It has to hurt the city budget so much that they are forced to train their officers better." The discovery phase of the trial revealed that Braden's supervisor had actually warned him about his aggression months prior, but hadn't formally reprimanded him. That opened the door for Manel liability failure to train and supervise. The city realized that if this went to a jury with a Silver Star recipient on the stand, the verdict could be $5 or $10 million. They folded. 6 months after the incident, the settlement was finalized. The city agreed to pay Marcus Thorne $1.3 million. But the money was just part of the deal. The consent decree required the department to overhaul its stop and ID training. Every officer had to watch the video of Thorne's arrest as an example of what not to do. Officer Kyle Braden was terminated for cause. He lost his pension. He lost his certification. He would never be a police officer again. On a crisp autumn Tuesday, Marcus Thorne returned to the plaza. He walked to the same concrete bench near the fountain. He was wearing the same green field jacket. He sat down. He placed his hands on his knees. He listened to the water. A young rookie officer walked by on foot patrol. He saw Thorne sitting there. The officer paused, looked at Thorne, and nodded respectfully. "Morning, sir," the officer said. "Good morning, officer," Thorne replied. The officer kept walking. That was the victory, not the money. The money, all $1.3 million of it, Thorne had already signed over to the Veterans Legal Defense Fund and the local Innocence Project. He didn't keep a dime. He didn't need it. He had his pension, he had his consultancy work, and he had his dignity. Thorne watched the water dance in the sunlight. He thought about Braden. He didn't hate the young man. He pitied him. Braden had traded his honor for a moment of power, and he had lost everything. Thorne looked directly at you, the viewer. His eyes were kind but intense, filled with the wisdom of a man who has seen the best and worst of humanity. "Rights are like muscles," Thorne said softly. "If you don't exercise them, they atrophy. If you don't defend them, you lose them. I fought for this country's constitution overseas. I wasn't about to let it be trampled on in a parking lot at home. Freedom isn't free, but it also isn't a gift from the government. It's yours. You just have to be willing to stand up for it." He stood up, adjusting his cap. "So I have to ask you," Thorne continued, "what is your freedom worth? Is it worth an awkward conversation? Is it worth a pair of handcuffs? Because if you aren't willing to say no when they cross the line, then you've already surrendered." That is the story of how a patrolman tried to bully a vagrant and ended up battling a captain. It cost the city $1.3 million, but it bought a lesson that was priceless. What do you think? Was $1.3 million enough for the humiliation of a war hero? Or should the city have paid more? And do you think officers like Braden should face criminal charges, not just firing? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you proud of our veterans, please hit the like button and share this with a friend. We need to keep telling these stories until the system changes. Stay safe, stay free, and thanks for watching.
Turn around, now. You're under arrest for soliciting and refusing a lawful order.
Officer, I'm donating property. I haven't committed a crime. This stop is unlawful.
Don't argue with me. Hands behind your back.
You're detaining me without probable cause, and your camera's recording
Stop
every
resisting.
second. I am not resisting.
You are violating my
It was 11:15 on a Tuesday morning in a sun-drenched parking lot in Charleston, South Carolina. To the casual observer, the scene looked like a standard police interaction gone wrong. A uniformed officer, young jaw set, tight hand, hovering near his taser. A civilian, an older black man standing tall next to a Ford F-150, refusing to be cowed. But Officer Kyle Braden, 28 years old and just 11 months out of his probationary period, had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. He saw a man in worn-out cargo pants and a faded olive drab t-shirt. He saw a truck filled with bags. He saw a vagrant loitering near the donation bins of the Veterans Support Center. What he didn't see was the retired Marine Corps colonel. He didn't see the Purple Heart recipient. He didn't see Marcus Thorne, the man appointed by the president to serve as the senior federal advocate for veteran housing. Marcus wasn't panicking. He wasn't shouting. He was analyzing Officer Braden's stance, his poor trigger discipline, and his rapidly flushing face with the cold, detached calculation of a man who had led battalions into combat zones. "Turn around," Braden barked, stepping into Marcus's personal space. "You're under arrest for aggressive panhandling and failure to obey a lawful order." "Aggressive panhandling," Marcus repeated, his voice dropping an octave, calm but dangerous. "I'm donating $3,000 worth of custom suits to this center. The only thing I'm soliciting is a receipt for my taxes." "Yeah, sure. And I'm the police commissioner. Turn around." Braden grabbed Marcus's arm. "Be very careful with that left shoulder, officer." Marcus said, his eyes locking onto Braden's aviators. "There is shrapnel in there from Fallujah that makes it stiff. If you yank it, I will sue you, your sergeant, and this entire city into bankruptcy." "Stop resisting," Braden yelled for the benefit of the dash cam wrenching the arm behind Marcus's back. Marcus winced a sharp intake of breath through his nose, but he didn't fight back. He allowed the steel cuffs to click shut around his wrists. "You have just violated my Fourth Amendment rights," Marcus stated clearly, speaking toward the growing crowd of onlookers. "You have detained me without reasonable suspicion, you have arrested me without probable cause, and you are currently using excessive force on a disabled veteran." "Tell it to the judge," Braden sneered, tightening the cuffs one notch too tight. "Oh, I will," Marcus replied. "And I suspect he'll be very interested to hear why you arrested a federal official for the crime of giving charity." Before we unravel this infuriating display of incompetence and authority abuse, I need you to do something for me. Stop what you're doing and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, your state, your city. And if you believe that our veterans deserve respect, not harassment, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is going to make your blood boil, and you need to see how it ends. Marcus stood by the donation bin, handcuffed like a common criminal. The sun beat down on the asphalt. He looked at the young officer who was now rummaging through the bed of Marcus's truck, treating the carefully folded Italian wool suits like garbage. Braden thought he had caught a grifter scamming the donation center. He thought he was cleaning up the streets. In reality, he had just lit a fuse that was going to blow up the entire department. To understand how a simple act of charity turned into a constitutional crisis, we have to go back just 20 minutes. Marcus Thorne had woken up that morning with a specific mission. At 62 years old, Marcus had spent the last 3 decades serving his country first in the Corps, then in the Pentagon, and now as a civilian watchdog, ensuring that federal grants for homeless veterans were actually reaching the people who needed them. He was a man of routine and precision. That morning he had cleared out his closet. These weren't just old clothes. These were bespoke suits from his days consulting in D.C. silk ties and dress shirts that cost more than Officer Braden's weekly paycheck. Marcus knew the Suits for Soldiers program at the local center helped veterans dress for job interviews. He wanted to give back to the brothers and sisters who hadn't been as fortunate as him in their transition to civilian life. He had dressed down for the task old yard work clothes. He drove his trusty F-150, a vehicle he kept immaculate. He pulled into the donation center lot, which was publicly accessible, and backed into a spot near the large metal bins. The center was closed for lunch, so Marcus began unloading the bags himself, stacking them neatly to ensure the clothes wouldn't wrinkle. He was humming a tune, enjoying the warm South Carolina air. He felt good. It was a good day to do good. Officer Kyle Braden was on patrol in Sector 4. Braden was the kind of cop who measured his worth by his arrest stats. He was 28, ambitious, and deeply insecure. He had been told by his field training officer months ago that he needed to be more proactive. To Braden, proactive didn't mean community engagement. It meant finding bad guys where there weren't any. He rolled his cruiser into the lot looking for expired tags or loiterers. What he saw was a black male roughly 6'2", wearing worn-out clothes, digging into the back of a truck near the donation bins. In Braden's mind, the narrative was instant and absolute theft. Or scam. He didn't run the plate on the F-150. If he had, he would have seen the vehicle was registered to Marcus Thorne, with a special designation for a disabled veteran plate, though the angle of the truck hid the tag from his immediate view. He didn't observe for 5 minutes to see what the man was actually doing. He just saw a profile that fit his bias. Braden put the cruiser in park and stepped out. He adjusted his belt, pulling his pants up, and walked over with a swagger that he thought commanded respect, but actually signaled inexperience. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Braden called out from 30 feet away. Marcus paused, holding a hanger with a gray Armani suit covered in plastic. He turned slowly, lowering his sunglasses. "Good morning, officer. Just dropping off some donations." "Donations, huh?" Braden closed the distance, his hand resting on his holster, not drawing but threatening. "Looks more like you're taking stuff out of there." "I am unloading my personal vehicle," Marcus said, his voice calm, the command voice dormant but present. "The center is closed, so I'm stacking them here for the intake coordinator." "That's a likely story," Braden scoffed. "We've had reports of people stealing from these bins, and we've had reports of people hanging around here begging for change from people dropping stuff off." Marcus frowned. "I'm sure you have. But as you can see, I am alone here. I'm not stealing, and I'm certainly not begging." "Let me see some ID," Braden demanded. This was the pivot point. The moment where a good officer would have looked at the quality of the suits, looked at the calm demeanor of the man, and realized his mistake. But Braden wasn't looking for facts. He was looking for compliance. "Officer," Marcus said, placing the suit gently in the bin, "I am under no obligation to provide identification unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. This is a consensual encounter, is it not?" Braden's eyes narrowed. He hated it when they knew the law. To him, knowing the law was a sign of guilt. "You're loitering on private property. That's a crime. ID now." "It is not private property. This is a municipal lot leased to a non-profit receiving federal funds." Marcus corrected him. "I am conducting lawful business. I am not loitering." "You getting smart with me?" Braden stepped closer. "I'm investigating a suspicious person. That's you. So you can either hand over your license or I can put you in the back of the car for obstruction." The air in the parking lot seemed to grow heavier, charged with the static of an unavoidable collision. Marcus Thorne took a slow breath. He had faced down insurgents, navigated the treacherous politics of Washington, D.C., and raised 3 children. He was not about to be intimidated by a man who looked like he hadn't started shaving until last Tuesday. "Officer, I am not getting smart." Marcus set his posture, straightening to his full height. He towered over Braden by 2 inches, but his presence made it feel like a foot. "I am asserting my constitutional rights. There is a difference. You have no probable cause. You have no reasonable suspicion. You are fishing." "I don't need to fish," Braden retorted, his voice rising, cracking slightly. "I see a guy in raggedy clothes with a truck full of expensive suits that clearly don't belong to him. That's possession of stolen property until proven otherwise." "Raggedy." Marcus looked down at his gardening clothes and chuckled dryly. "These are work clothes, son, and the suits are mine. If you had run the plate on my truck, you'd know who I am." "I told you not to call me son," Braden yelled. He was losing control of the interaction, and he knew it. A small crowd had started to form on the sidewalk nearby. A woman in a floral dress, probably in her late 50s, had stopped pushing her stroller and was watching. A man in a delivery uniform paused his route. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," Braden ordered. "Put your hands where I can see them." "My hands are right here," Marcus said, holding them out, palms open. "I'm going to reach into my pocket to retrieve my phone to record this encounter. Don't you reach for anything." Braden's hand jerked his taser halfway out of the holster. "Keep your hands up. You are escalating this unnecessarily," Marcus said, his voice steel. "You are making a mistake that you cannot undo. I am asking you as a senior federal official to call your supervisor." "Federal official?" Braden laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Yeah, and I'm the King of England. You're a panhandler with a stolen wardrobe. I'm done asking." Braden grabbed his radio. "Dispatch show me 10 to 15 with 1 male subject at the donation center. Non-compliant. Possible 488 petty theft and soliciting." "Soliciting?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "Who am I soliciting? There is no one here but you and me." "You're soliciting trouble," Braden mumbled, dropping the radio. "Last chance. ID or cuffs." "I am not providing ID for an unlawful stop," Marcus said firmly. "I am asking you to articulate the crime. Looking suspicious is not a crime. Delaware versus Prowse, Terry versus Ohio. You need specific facts, officer. What are they?" Braden didn't have facts. He had an ego, and it was currently being bruised in front of an audience. He pointed a finger at Marcus's chest. "You're blocking a public easement, you're disturbing the peace, and you're refusing a lawful order." "I am on a parking spot. I am speaking at a conversational volume. And the order is unlawful." Marcus parried every point effortlessly. "That's it," Braden snapped. He moved in. Marcus saw it coming. He knew he could physically overpower the young man. Marine Corps hand-to-hand combat training didn't just disappear with age, but he also knew that any physical resistance, even defensive, would be a death sentence. The headline would read, "Violent Vagrant Attacks Officer." He had to win this mentally, legally, and strategically. He had to let the system break itself against his innocence. "I am submitting under duress," Marcus announced loudly as Braden grabbed his wrist. "I am not resisting arrest. I am documenting your misconduct." "Shut up," Braden hissed. "I will not," Marcus replied. "Every word you say is being recorded by that camera over there on the bank building and by the lady in the floral dress who just started filming on her phone." Braden glanced over his shoulder. The woman in the floral dress was indeed holding her phone up horizontal mode, steady hands. "Back up," Braden yelled at her. "I'm on a public sidewalk, officer," the woman shouted back. She sounded like a retired schoolteacher, authoritative and unafraid. "I have a right to be here, and I see a man who isn't doing anything wrong." "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus called out. "Please keep recording." "Turn around." Braden spun Marcus forcefully against the truck. The metal of the truck bed dug into Marcus's hip. "Watch the shoulder," Marcus warned again, his voice tight with pain, but controlled. "I have a reconstructed rotator cuff." Braden ignored him. He was operating on adrenaline and anger now. He pulled Marcus's arms back, cranking the left one high. The pain was blinding white-hot needles shooting down Marcus's spine. He gritted his teeth, refusing to give Braden the satisfaction of a scream. The handcuffs ratcheted shut. Click, click, click. The sound was final. "You are under arrest." Braden panted, slightly out of breath from the exertion of his own anger. "For what charge?" Marcus asked, leaning his forehead against the hot metal of his truck to stabilize himself against the pain in his shoulder. "Interfering with a police investigation, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest without violence, and soliciting without a permit." Braden listed them off, throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. Braden patted Marcus down roughly. He pulled Marcus's wallet from his back pocket. It was a thick leather wallet. Braden didn't open it. He just shoved it into his own cargo pocket. He found the keys to the F-150 and shoved those in his pocket too. "You're impounding my vehicle?" Marcus asked. "On what grounds it is legally parked?" "Incident to arrest," Braden said dismissively. "Can't leave it here unsecured with all this merchandise in the back." "That merchandise is my property," Marcus said. "Officer, I want you to listen to me very closely. In that wallet you will find my identification. You will find my driver's license. You will also find a Department of Defense identification card and a federal credentials packet. I strongly suggest you look at them before you put me in that car." "I'll look at them at the station," Braden said. He grabbed Marcus by the bicep and marched him toward the cruiser. Marcus walked with a limp. He usually tried to hide shrapnel in the knee, another souvenir from his service. The forced march made it more pronounced. "He's limping," the woman recording shouted. "Why are you dragging him? He's not fighting you." "Back up or you're next," Braden threatened the witness. "Intimidation of a witness," Marcus noted aloud. "Title 18 U.S. Code, another federal violation." "Get in." Braden shoved Marcus's head down and pushed him into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard, the space cramped. For a man of Marcus's size, with a bad knee and a frozen shoulder, it was torture. He had to twist his body to fit the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Braden slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Inside the car, the air conditioning was blasting, smelling of stale coffee and sanitizer. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He focused on his breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Tactical breathing. He needed his heart rate down. He needed his mind sharp. Braden got into the front seat. He didn't look back at Marcus. He was typing furiously on his laptop, probably trying to frame the narrative in the call log before they even arrived. "Officer Braden," Marcus spoke through the plexiglass divider. "You have my wallet in your pocket. I'm requesting that you check my medical alert card. I have a heart condition related to my service. The stress of this unlawful arrest is a medical risk." "You seemed fine when you were arguing with me," Braden said, putting the car in gear. "We'll be at the station in 10 minutes. The nurse can check you out." "You are willfully ignoring a medical notification," Marcus said. "Noted." Braden turned on his lights, but not his siren, and pulled out of the lot. As they drove past the woman filming, Marcus nodded to her. She nodded back, looking terrified but determined. The ride to the precinct was tense. Braden turned up the radio, blasting rock music to drown out any further attempts by Marcus to speak. It was petty, it was childish, and it was the behavior of a man who deep down in the pit of his stomach was starting to feel the cold worm of doubt wiggling around. What if he really is a Fed, Braden thought. No, look at the truck. Look at the clothes. Just a crazy old guy. Marcus sat in the back watching the city pass by. He had fought for this country. He had bled for it. He had spent his entire adult life trying to make it better. And here he was in the back of a squad car, treated like an enemy combatant in his own hometown because a 28-year-old with a badge couldn't see past his own bias. The sadness washed over him, followed by a cold, hard resolve. He wasn't doing this for himself anymore. He was doing it for every veteran who didn't have a high-ranking title. He was doing it for the kids in his neighborhood. He was going to teach the Charleston Police Department a lesson they would never forget. The cruiser rolled into the secured sally port of the North District Precinct. The heavy metal doors clanged shut behind them, sealing out the sunlight. Braden killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. "Let's go." Braden opened the back door. He hauled Marcus out. Marcus groaned involuntarily as his stiff knee hit the concrete floor. Braden marched him through the booking doors. The air inside smelled of floor wax and old sweat. The intake desk was manned by Sergeant Mike Kowalski. Kowalski was 55, a dinosaur in the department with gray hair cut high and tight and eyes that had seen everything twice. He was drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup and reading a report. He looked up as Braden wrestled Marcus toward the bench. Kowalski's eyes went from Braden to Marcus. He paused. He squinted. "What you got, Braden?" Kowalski asked, his voice gravelly. "Soliciting disorderly resisting," Braden announced proudly. "Caught him at the vet center. Guy was aggressive. Claimed he was some kind of federal agent." Kowalski stood up slowly. He walked around the desk. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the way Marcus stood spine straight, despite the handcuffs, chin up, eyes clear, and judging. Kowalski knew that stance. He had seen it in the mirror every day for 30 years. He had seen it in his father. "Uncuff him from this bench," Kowalski said quietly. "Sarge, he's a flight risk." He was belligerent. "I said," Kowalski's voice was like a whip crack, "don't chain him to the bench. Put him in the chair." Braden rolled his eyes, but complied, shoving Marcus into a plastic chair. "I got his ID right here. Haven't run it yet. System in the car was lagging." Braden tossed Marcus's leather wallet onto the counter. It landed with a heavy thud. Kowalski picked it up. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Marcus Aurelius Thorne. Kowalski flipped the flap. There, behind clear plastic, was a badge. Not a tin police badge. A heavy gold and blue enamel crest. United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Office of the Secretary. Below it, a card with a holographic seal, Senior Federal Advocate. Clearance level, Top Secret /SCI. Kowalski felt the blood drain from his face. He flipped another flap. A laminated card edged in purple. Purple Heart recipient. Operation Phantom Fury. USMC. Kowalski looked up at Marcus. He looked at the vagrant clothes. Then he looked closer at the t-shirt. It was faded, yes, but the logo on the chest was the emblem of the 1st Marine Division. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Kowalski whispered. "What?" Braden asked, filling out paperwork. "He have a warrant." Kowalski walked around the desk, ignoring Braden. He walked right up to Marcus. He looked at the handcuffs. Then he looked Braden dead in the eye. "You arrested Colonel Thorne?" Kowalski asked, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "Colonel who?" Braden asked. This man, Kowalski, held up the federal credentials, his hand shaking, is Colonel Marcus Thorne. He runs the Federal Housing Oversight Committee, the one that approves the grants for our community outreach program, the one the chief has been begging for all year. Braden stopped writing. The pen hovered over the paper. But he was wearing rags. He was at the donation bin. I was donating $3,000 of suits. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the station. His voice was calm, echoing in the quiet room. And I told Officer Braden 5 times who I was. I told him to check my wallet. I told him about my shoulder.
You're under arrest for soliciting and refusing a lawful order.
Officer, I'm donating property. I haven't committed a crime. This stop is unlawful.
You didn't check his ID. He refused to show it initially. He was resisting. I asserted my rights, Marcus corrected. There is a difference, Sergeant, and your officer here doesn't seem to know it. Kowalski moved quickly behind Marcus. Colonel, I am so sorry. I'm taking these off right now. He fumbled for his key. Leave them on, Marcus said. Kowalski froze. Sir, I said leave them on. I want the watch commander down here. I want Captain Henderson. And I want him to see exactly how his officers treat a disabled veteran who asserts his Fourth Amendment rights. Sir, please, we can resolve this, Kowalski pleaded. We will resolve this, Marcus said coldly. But first, get Henderson. Now. Captain Frank Henderson was in his office on the second floor eating a sandwich and looking forward to his retirement in 6 months. When the call came from the booking desk, he didn't rush. But when Kowalski said the words, Federal Advocate and Unlawful Arrest, Henderson dropped his sandwich. He ran down the stairs, bursting into the booking area. The scene that greeted him was a nightmare. Marcus Thorne sat in the plastic chair, hands cuffed behind his back, looking like a statue of judgment. Braden was standing in the corner, looking pale and small. Kowalski was standing at attention, looking sick. Henderson knew Marcus Thorne. He had met him at a gala 2 years ago. He knew the man's reputation. Thorne was a bulldog for civil rights and had a direct line to the DOJ. Colonel Thorne, Henderson gasped, approaching him. Good God, Mike, get those cuffs off him. He refused, Captain, Kowalski said. He wanted you to see. Henderson turned to Braden. What in the hell did you do? I thought he was a panhandler, Cap. He was by the bins. He wouldn't show ID. Braden's voice was a whisper. Did he commit a crime? Henderson barked. Did you see him steal? Did you see him aggressive? He was uncooperative. Being black and knowing your rights isn't uncooperative. Henderson yelled, his face turning beet red. You detained a federal official without probable cause. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've just cost this city its entire veteran housing grant. You've just invited a federal audit. Henderson turned back to Marcus. Colonel, please, allow me to remove these. This is a terrible mistake. Officer Braden he's new. He's zealous. We can fix this. Marcus looked at Henderson. Captain, I want you to listen to me. My shoulder is throbbing. My wrists are bleeding. I have been humiliated in front of my community. You cannot fix this with an apology. We'll drop all charges, Henderson said quickly. There are no charges. It never happened. I'll drive you back to your truck personally. I'll have the car detailed. It happened, Marcus said. And there are witnesses and video. We can handle this internally. Henderson pressed sweat beading on his forehead. Disciplinary action, suspension, whatever you want. I want the cuffs off now, Marcus said. Henderson nodded to Kowalski, who rushed forward and unlocked the cuffs. Marcus brought his arms forward, slowly grimacing in pain. His wrists were marked with deep red furrows. He rubbed his left shoulder, his face tightening. Do you need a medic? Henderson asked. I will see my own doctor, Marcus said, standing up. He towered over Henderson. And I will be documenting the injuries. Colonel, please. Henderson lowered his voice. Don't destroy this kid's life. He made a bad call. Marcus looked at Braden. The young officer was staring at the floor, trembling. He didn't make a bad call, Captain, Marcus said softly. He made a choice. He saw a black man in work clothes and chose to see a criminal. He saw a citizen asserting rights and chose to see a threat. That is not a training error. That is a character flaw. And a man with that flaw has no business carrying a badge and a gun. He's young. I was leading men into combat when I was 22. Marcus cut him off. I was responsible for lives. If I made a bad call based on prejudice, people died. Do not make excuses for him. The booking room was silent. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. "Here is what is going to happen," Marcus said, his voice echoing with the authority of a man who had commanded thousands. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. "1." Marcus held up a finger. "I want a digital copy of the body camera footage, the dash cam footage, and the booking surveillance unredacted provided to my attorney by 5:00 p.m. today. If it is lost or corrupted, I will call the Attorney General personally." Henderson nodded. "You'll have it." 2, Marcus continued. "I want a written statement from Officer Braden articulating exactly what probable cause he had to detain me. I want him to put it on paper. I want him to commit to his lie or admit his bias." Braden flinched in the corner. 3, Marcus stepped closer to Henderson. "I want the contact information for the city attorney, because I am going to file a civil rights lawsuit. Not for the money. I will donate every dime to the shelter you were trying to protect me from, but I want a consent decree. I want independent oversight of your stop-and-frisk statistics." "Colonel, that will cripple the department," Henderson warned. "No, Captain. Officers like him cripple the department." Marcus pointed at Braden without looking at him. "Transparency will save it." Marcus reached out and took his wallet from the counter. He checked the contents. Everything was there. "You have my keys?" Marcus asked. Braden stepped forward, his hand shaking as he held out the keys to the F-150. "Sir, Marcus snatched the keys. He didn't look at the boy. He looked at Henderson. "Am I free to go, or am I being detained?" "You are free to go, sir." Henderson said, his shoulders slumping. "Colonel, I really am sorry." "I know you are, Frank," Marcus said, using the captain's first name for the first time. "But sorry doesn't fix a torn rotator cuff, and sorry doesn't give me back my dignity." Marcus turned and walked toward the exit. He walked with a limp, his shoulder aching, his wrists burning, but he held his head high. He pushed through the doors and walked out into the afternoon sun. He took a deep breath of fresh air. He pulled his phone out and dialed a number. "Hello, David." "Yes, it's Marcus. Clear your schedule. We have a Title 42, Section 1983 case." "Yes, today." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By Wednesday morning, the video from the woman in the floral dress, Martha Higgins, a retired librarian, was everywhere. It had 2 million views on Twitter and 5 million on Facebook. The image of the young white officer twisting the arms of the elderly black veteran was splashed across every news channel from Atlanta to D.C. The headline was devastating. "Hero Colonel arrested for donating suits." Officer Braden's body camera footage, released within 24 hours due to Marcus's pressure, was even worse. It showed the arrogance, the dismissal of rights, and the clear lack of probable cause. It showed Marcus being calm, respectful, and articulate while Braden was aggressive and rude. The city of Charleston didn't even try to fight it. The city attorney took one look at the case file and advised a settlement immediately. They knew that putting Marcus Thorne on a witness stand in front of a jury would result in a verdict that would bankrupt the county. The settlement was reached in 3 weeks, $500,000. Marcus Thorne stood on the steps of the Veterans Support Center a month later. He was wearing one of his custom suits, his arm in a sling. He held the check in his good hand. Reporters were gathered around. "I did not seek this money for myself," Marcus told the cameras. "I have a pension, I have a home, but there are men and women who wore the uniform who are sleeping under bridges tonight. Men and women who are harassed because they look poor or lost or broken." He handed the check to the director of the center. "This money will build a new wing for transitional housing. It will be named the Liberty Wing, because liberty is what we fought for and liberty is what we must protect here at home. Say." As for Officer Kyle Braden, his career was over before it began. He was terminated for cause conduct, unbecoming violation of civil rights, and filing a false report. The police union refused to back him after the video surfaced. He became a pariah, the face of bad policing. Captain Henderson was forced into early retirement. The department was placed under a federal consent decree mandating retraining on racial bias and constitutional policing, a program designed and overseen by Marcus Thorne's office. But the real ending of this story isn't about the money or the firings. It was a quiet Tuesday evening 6 months later. Marcus was at the center volunteering. He saw a young man walk in. The kid looked rough, dirty clothes, nervous eyes. He was a vet fresh back from deployment, clearly struggling. Marcus walked over. He didn't judge the clothes. He didn't assume the worst. "Welcome home, Marine," Marcus said softly. "You look like you could use a fresh start." The young man looked at Marcus, then at the rack of suits. "I can't afford these, sir." "They're not for sale, son." Marcus smiled, the pain in his shoulder a dull reminder of why he was here. "They're a gift, from one soldier to another." The young man wept, and Marcus stood there, a guardian in a suit, proving that true authority isn't about power or badges. It's about service. It's about seeing the human being in front of you. What do you think, was a $500,000 settlement enough for the humiliation Colonel Thorne endured, or should the price for violating the Constitution be higher? Let me know in the comments below. And please share this story, because for every Marcus Thorne who can fight back, there are 1,000 others who can't. We need to be their voice. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay informed, and always know your rights.
We got a call. Suspicious person casing homes. Show me your ID.
I'm on a public sidewalk. I'm not suspected of a crime. You don't get to demand my papers.
You don't tell me what I can do. Last warning ID or you're going in cuffs.
Then do it.
Let's say it clear on your camera. You're arresting me.
The command barked out across the quiet, manicured lawn of a suburban street in Oak Creek, Virginia. It was 10:15 in the morning on a Tuesday. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Officer Kyle Vance was about to make a mistake that would cost the city of Oak up, fold the chair, and walk away. Or what? Or you go to jail. Officer Kyle Vance had been Creek $4.5 million and end his law enforcement career before his 29th birthday. He was standing with patrolling the streets of Oak Creek for 6 years. He was 28 years old, physically imposing, and entirely convinced that his hand resting ominously on his holster, staring down at a man who was sitting peacefully in a simple canvas folding chair on badge, granted him absolute authority over every square inch of his jurisdiction. He stood 6'2" with his hand the concrete sidewalk. To Officer Vance, the man looked like a vagrant, a defiant trespasser refusing to bow to authority. Resting casually near his holster, staring down at a man who was sitting quietly on a simple canvas folding chair. The man was Marcus Thorne, but the man in the chair was not a vagrant. He was Elias Thorne. And he wasn't just a. He was 64 years old. He was drinking coffee from a thermos. He was wearing pressed khakis and resident of the neighborhood. He was a man who had spent 30 years commanding battalions and navigating conflict zones that would have made Officer Vance weep a button-down shirt. And he was not moving. What Officer Vance didn't know what he hadn't. Elias didn't flinch at the officer's aggression. He didn't jump up. He didn't bother to check was that the man he was threatening was a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps. Apologize. He simply took a slow sip from his travel mug, looked the young officer in the eye, and said, in a man who had survived combat tours that would have broken Vance in a week, a man who knew the law better than a voice that rumbled like a idling diesel engine, "Officer, I am sitting on a public sidewalk. I am not impeding the officer standing over him. What happened over the next 20 minutes would result in the end of Vance's law enforcement career traffic. I have committed no crime. You have no cause to demand my identification." This was the moment. This, the humiliation of a nosy neighbor and a $4.5 million payout from the city's liability insurance. It was the turning point where Officer Vance could have de-escalated. He could have asked a polite question. He could a Tuesday morning in October, clear and crisp, the kind of morning that usually passes without incident. But in Oak Creek, have realized that the man in the clean polo shirt and pressed khakis didn't fit the profile of a troublemaker. But incident is often defined by who belongs and who doesn't. And on this particular Tuesday, Officer Vance decided that Marcus Thorne didn't belong. Before we get into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, tell us in the comments. Do Kyle Vance had been a police officer for 5 years, and in his mind his authority was absolute. When he gave you think police officers should be personally liable for civil rights violations. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and order people obeyed. When they didn't, it was resistance. And resistance was something he had been trained to crush. We tell the stories that need to be told. The confrontation didn't happen in a vacuum. It started. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you, Vance snapped, stepping closer, invading Elias with an assumption. Vance saw a black man sitting on a folding chair on a suburban sidewalk and assumed vagrant. He assumed threats personal space. We got a call about a suspicious individual casing homes. You fit the description. Now stand. He assumed compliance. He was wrong on all 3 counts. Marcus Thorne looked up at the officer, his expression up and put your hands on the hood of my car. Elias Thorne set his mug down on the grass beside Readable behind wire-rimmed sunglasses. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He simply took his chair. He moved with a deliberate slowness that was born of discipline, not fear. I live 3 houses down, son. A slow sip of his coffee and set the cup back down on the small table attached to his chair. Officer, Thorne said, I am waiting for a ride to the VA hospital for a checkup. I suggest you lower your voice and check your tone before you do something you can't undo. Don't call me son. Vance spat back, his voice deep and steady, the kind of voice that commands a room without shouting. I am not obstructing the flow. I'm the one with the badge. Before we get into the details of the arrest that would dominate a foot traffic, there is 4 feet of clearance in front of me. I am not soliciting. I am not intoxicated. I am a private citizen on public property. You have no lawful order to give here. Vance's face flushed national headlines. For weeks, we need to understand the gravity of this misunderstanding. This wasn't just a bad stop. He wasn't used to being quoted the law. He was used to fear. I'm telling you that. This was a collision of 2 different worlds. On one side, a 28-year-old officer who you are disturbing the peace. We got calls. Neighbors are scared. Now let me see some ID. Thorne didn't view the community as a battlefield and himself as a warrior. On the other, a 62-year-old retired at reach for his wallet. He didn't move his hands toward his pockets. He kept them visible, resting on the Marine colonel who had led men into actual battles and understood that true power lies in restraint. What happened next on that sidewalk wasn't just a legal violation. It was a moral failure that exposed the deep rotting cracks in the department's culture. Officer Vance reached for his radio, his eyes never leaving Elias. Dispatch, send me a backup unit. I have a non-compliant subject on Sycamore Drive, refusing lawful orders. Situation is escalating. The situation was indeed escalating, but only because Vance was the one pouring gasoline on a fire that didn't exist. Elias remained seated, his posture upright, his hands visible on his knees. He knew exactly what was happening. He had seen young men like this before, jumpy, arrogant, desperate to prove they were tough. But usually those young men were 19-year armrests of his chair. I am not suspected of a crime, officer. Therefore, under this state's statutes, I am not required to identify myself to you, unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I am committing old privates. He could correct with a sharp word. This man had a gun and the power of the state behind him. Elias, or I'm about to commit a crime. We are done here. This was the moment Vance could have walked away. He could have realized he was out of his depth, but he didn't. Instead, he reached for his radio. Knew he was in danger not from a criminal, but from the very person sworn to protect him. Do you think officers should... Marcus Thorne was not a man who looked for trouble, but he was a man who had spent 3 decades learning how to be required to have de-escalation training before hitting the streets. If you're watching this, hit that, like it. Born in 1960, he had enlisted in the Marine Corps 3 days after his 18th birthday. He had served 30 years, retiring as a master sergeant. His service record was the stuff of legend within button, and let us know your thoughts. Because what Officer Vance did next is a textbook example of why badge-heavy policing destroys trust. Elias Thorne had moved to Oak Creek 4 years ago looking for quiet, after 3 decades in his unit. He had been on the ground in Beirut in '83. He had led squads in the First Gulf War. He had come out of retirement to help train units for Fallujah. He wore the scars of his service, the United States Marine Corps. Retiring with the rank of colonel, he had seen enough noise and chaos to last 10 lifetimes. He had a piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder that still stiffened up in the cold and a knee that clicked when he walked. But his mind was sharp and his discipline was ironclad. He had moved to Oak Creek 2 years ago, served in the Gulf War, 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He held a Silver Star for valor, a Purple Heart for the shrapnel still lodged near his shoulder blade, and the unshakable respect of every Marine who had ever served under him. He was a man of routine. Every Tuesday, his friend and former Master Sergeant Bill picked him up at 10:30 a.m. to go to the VA. Elias liked to wait outside in his folding chair to looking for quiet. He bought a small, immaculate bungalow on a corner lot. He kept his lawn manicured to military standards. He paid his taxes early. He was a deacon at his church. On this particular morning, he was waiting for his get some sun and fresh air. He was impeccably dressed, as he always was. Even in retirement, Colonel Friend, Lieutenant Colonel retired. Jim Miller to pick him up. They were headed to a ceremony at the state capitol. Thorne didn't believe in casual the way civilians did. His polo shirt was tucked in. His belt matched his shoes. He was the picture of an upstanding citizen. But to Officer Kyle Vance, none of that mattered. Vance saw honor a friend they had lost years ago. Jim was running late. Jim was always running late, so Marcus had brought only one thing. A black man in a predominantly white affluent neighborhood, sitting where he didn't belong, out his camping chair to enjoy the morning sun while he waited. He didn't want to stand for 45 minutes. His knee was acting up. So he sat. He watched the cars go by. He nodded at a woman walking a golden retriever who had smiled back. He was at peace. Marcus was a man of routine and precision, his refusing to bow down. Officer Kyle Vance had a reputation, though not the kind you want. In his 5 years with clothes were pressed, his shoes were shined, even his relaxation was structured. He wasn't just hanging out. He was the Oak Creek Police Department. He had racked up 14 complaints. Most were for discourtesy or positioned. He had checked the sidewalk width to ensure he wasn't blocking strollers or wheelchairs. He was respectful of the public, unprofessional conduct. 2 involved excessive use of force. Both had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded space. He was the definition of a model citizen, but to some eyes, a black man sitting still is a provocation. To some eyes, confidence looks like arrogance. Marcus knew this. He had lived with it for 64 years. He hoped, perhaps naively, that his age and his demeanor would protect him in his own neighborhood. He was wrong. Or within policy. Vance was known in the locker room as a hard charger, a guy who produced arrests and tickets. His sergeant, a man who preferred stats over community relations, had noted in Vance's last performance review that he was proactive, but needs to work on patience. That was an understatement. Vance operated on a hair trigger. He believed that respect was something demanded at the barrel of a gun, not earned through service. He had grown up in a neighboring. The trouble hadn't started with Officer Vance. It had started behind the blinds of the blue colonial house across the street. Brenda Miller, no relation to Jim, was 38 years old, a stay-at-home mother whose children were at school and the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's character. Brenda spent a significant portion of her day on the neighborhood Facebook group, posting alerts about unfamiliar cars and suspicious teenagers. She had lived in Oak Creek for 4 years, and in her mind she owned the view from her living room window. When she saw Marcus Thorne unfold his chair at 9:15 a.m., she didn't see a neighbor. She didn't see a town watched too many action movies and viewed every interaction with the public as a potential ambush. He didn't see citizens, senior citizens, soaking up the autumn sun. She saw an intruder. She watched him for 5 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into a narrative. He saw suspects. And on this Tuesday morning, his bias had painted a target on Elias Thorne's chest that had no basis in reality. Why was he just sitting there? Was he watching the houses? Was he counting the cars? Last warning. Vance said, his hand twitching near his handcuffs. ID, now. I have you a lookout for a burglary crew. In Brenda's mind, there was no logical reason for a man like him to be sitting told you. Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that had commanded battalions. I am under no legal on a sidewalk in a neighborhood like hers, unless he was up to no good. She grabbed her phone. She didn't obligation to identify myself unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I am committing, or am about to commit a crime. Walk outside to ask him if he needed help. She didn't wave. She dialed 911. Her. Sitting on a sidewalk is not a crime. Waiting for a ride is not a crime. Being black in this neighborhood voice on the recording, which would later be played for a jury and millions of YouTube viewers, was breathless and frantic. Is not a crime. You're loitering, Vance countered. And you're impeding the 911. What is your emergency? Yes, I need police immediately. There's a suspicious man sitting flow of pedestrian traffic. Elias glanced up and down the empty street. There isn't a single pedestrian for half on the sidewalk in front of my house. Is he doing anything aggressive, ma'am? He's staring at the houses. He's casing them. He has a bag. I think I saw a weapon. He looks a mile officer. And loitering requires intent to commit a crime or cause a disturbance. I am doing neither. I am enjoying the morning. You're arguing with the police? Vance said, his face reddening. Like he's on drugs or something. He's making me feel very unsafe. I'm home alone. That's a disturbance. It is a circular logic that too many citizens have faced. You are suspicious because you are here. Did you see a weapon, ma'am? The dispatcher asked, trying to filter the bias from the facts. You are disturbing the peace because you are arguing that you aren't disturbing the peace. It is a trap designed to... I don't know. He reached into a bag. Please, just send someone. He refuses to leave. Brenda forced compliance or justify an arrest. Elias Thorne knew this. He also knew that if he reached into his pocket for his wallet, Now hadn't spoken to him, so she couldn't know if he refused to leave, but she knew the buzz this jumpy officer might shoot him and claim he reached for a weapon. So he kept his hands on his knees perfectly still. I am not arguing, Elias said calmly. I am educating you on the law you swore to uphold. And words that got a faster response. She hung up and peeked through the blinds, waiting for the sirens, feeling I am suggesting for the last time that you walk away. But Kyle Vance couldn't walk away. His righteous sense of duty. She was protecting her castle. She had no idea she was about to bankrupt the city. Officer Kyle Vance's ego wouldn't let him. He had been challenged in broad daylight, and in his mind, backing down now was the bad apple that departments claim are rare, yet somehow keep on the payroll. At 28, a defeat. He didn't know he was arguing with a man who had negotiated with warlords and briefed generals. He thought he was dealing with a suspect, and he was about to make the move that would ruin his life. He had a personnel file that was already thick with complaints. 14 of them, to be exact. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct. 2 were for excessive force. In every single case, the department had cleared him, or the chain of events that led Officer Vance to that sidewalk didn't start with him. It started with a phone call. It issued a minor reprimand. Officer Vance is proactive, his sergeant had written in his last evaluation. He has started with Sheila Rossi. Sheila was 38 years old, the treasurer of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association, and a woman who spent the majority of her day peering through her blinds. Sheila considered herself the guardian of the neighborhood. She knew every car aggressive in crime prevention. Vance viewed the world through a tactical lens that he had learned not in the military that belonged on the street and every car that didn't. She knew the garbage pickup schedule down to the minute. And he had never served, but in warrior mindset training seminars he paid for out of pocket. To Vance, every civilian a very specific idea of who belonged in Oak Creek. At 9:55 a.m. was a potential combatant, and every interaction was a battle for dominance. When the call came in about a suspicious male, Sheila had looked out her front window and seen a man sitting in a chair on the sidewalk 3 houses down. She knew the house possibly armed casing houses. Vance didn't think about investigation. He thought about neutralization. He was 3. It belonged to the quiet older man who kept to himself, but she claimed later that she couldn't tell blocks away. He flipped his lights on, cutting through a red light, his adrenaline already spiking. He pictured a drug addict. If the man in the chair was the homeowner. In her call to 911, she didn't mention that. He pictured a burglar. He pictured a fight. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb, tires screeching slightly. He was sitting calmly. She didn't mention he was well dressed. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, hi, this is Sheila Rossi on Sycamore Drive. There's a suspicious man, intentionally aggressive. He wanted to shock the subject into submission. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his vest, his sitting on the sidewalk in front of 420 Sycamore. He's been there for 20 minutes. Is he doing anything, ma'am? Is he approaching anyone? He's watching the houses. Sheila hand dropping to his weapon retention strap. He saw the man sitting there, calm, still. To Vance, this wasn't said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He's got a chair set up like he's camping at peaceful behavior. It was defiance. It was a challenge, and Kyle Vance did not back down from challenges. Out. He's staring at the Joneses' house across the street. I think he's casing the neighborhood to... He walked up the lawn, cutting across the grass instead of using the walkway, asserting his control over the space. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask, "Good morning, sir. Do you live around here?" He went see who's at home. He looks threatening. Threatening how, ma'am, does he have straight to the command? You need to move, now. It was the opening move of a man who had never a weapon. He looks like he might. Sheila lied. It was a calculated lie, one she knew would ensure been taught that respect is earned, not taken. It was the approach of a bully with a badge, and he was about to try a faster police response. He's got a big bag next to him. It was a laptop bag, zipped, and bully a man who had stared down tank columns. Back on the sidewalk, the air had grown thick. The pleasant closed. And he's just staring. It's making me very uncomfortable. We have a lot of children in this neighborhood. Morning atmosphere was gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic taste of impending violence. Several neighbors had come out onto their porches. There were no children outside. It was a Tuesday morning. They were all in school. But Sheila knew the Buzz landscaping crew 2 houses down had turned off their leaf blowers to watch. Phones were coming out. Thorne noticed the audience words. Suspicious. Threatening. Children. Okay, ma'am. We'll send an officer out to check it out. Please hurry, Sheila said. I'm afraid he might try to break, but he kept his eyes locked on Vance. I asked you for ID? Vance barked, stepping closer. He in somewhere. When Sheila hung up the phone, she felt a surge of self-righteous satisfaction. She was protecting was now inside Thorne's personal space, looming over the seated man. It was an intimidation tactic designed to make the subject feel small to trigger a fight-or-flight response that would justify an arrest. Thorne didn't her property values. She was keeping the neighborhood safe. She didn't consider that she was potentially signing a death warrant for Flinch. He took another sip of coffee. "And I declined, officer, as is my right. I have identified a neighbor she had simply never bothered to introduce herself to." She peeked through the blinds again, watching Elias sip his coffee. She didn't see a retired colonel. She saw an intruder. This is the weaponization of 911. No crime. You have identified no crime. This conversation is voluntary, and I am choosing to end it. Please step. It is a tool that allows bias to be outsourced to men with guns. Sheila Rossi didn't have to confront Elias. Away from me. "You don't give orders here," Vance shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "I am." She didn't have to ask him what he was doing. She could simply make a call, sprinkle in a few scary investigating a report of a suspicious person with a weapon. "Now stand up. Put your hands on your head." "The only weapon here is on your hip, son," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into the command tone words, and unleash the force of the state. She watched with anticipation as the patrol car turned the corner, hoping to see the intruder removed. She had no idea that her phone call was being recorded and that those recordings would eventually he had used to direct platoons. "And you are escalating a non-event. You are making a mistake that be played on national news, exposing her bias to the world." Officer Vance was 3 blocks away when the call came up. "Will cost you your badge. Look at me. Do I look like a vagrant? Do I look like a threat? I am on his computer terminal. Suspicious person. Sycamore Drive. Subject casing houses. Possible weapon." His mind immediately shifted, a retired master sergeant. "I am waiting for a ride. I suggest you get back in your car and patrol elsewhere." Gears. He wasn't going to a coffee klatch. He was going to a potential burglary in progress. "That's it," Vance snapped. "You're under arrest." "For what?" Thorne asked, still didn't read the notes critically. He didn't think, why would a burglar bring a folding chair seated? Failure to comply, obstruction, disorderly conduct. Vance was making it up as he went along, throwing out charges, hoping one would stick. "Stand up now, or I will make you stand up." "I am physically..." He just saw suspicious and weapon. His heart rate elevated. He drove a little faster. The unable to stand quickly due to a service injury. Thorne lied, calmly testing the officer's control. "If you touch bad apple, theory is often used to dismiss incidents like this. People say Vance was just one bad cop, but Vance me without cause, you are committing assault." Vance didn't listen. He reached down, grabbing Thorne's left arm, the one with the shrapnel damage, and yanked. Pain shot through Marcus Thorne's shoulder, white-hot and familiar. He gritted his teeth but did not strike back. He knew that any physical resistance didn't operate in a vacuum. He was the product of a system that had ignored the red flags for years. In his second year on the force, Vance had been reprimanded for screaming at a teenage girl who was jaywalking. Even defensive would be used to justify a beating. He went limp, allowing the momentum to pull him out of the chair. Had threatened to arrest her parents for child neglect. The complaint was sustained, but the punishment was a verbal counseling. In his third year, he had pulled his taser on a delivery driver who was double-parked, claiming the driver looked aggressive. The Vance, expecting a fight, stumbled backward, dragging the older man with him. Thorne kept his balance, planting his feet. Driver was a 50-year-old father of 3 delivering flowers. That complaint was dismissed because the driver didn't stop resisting. Vance screamed for the benefit of the body camera, despite the fact that Thorne was standing perfectly still, follow through with the paperwork. Vance had learned that he could be aggressive, he could be rude, and he could escalate. Vance spun him around, twisting the injured arm behind Thorne's back with unnecessary force. He kicked the folding chair situations without consequence. He had learned that Officer safety was a magic phrase that justified almost any behavior. If he felt unsafe, he could act. And he always felt unsafe around people who didn't immediately submit to his will, sending it skittering across the sidewalk. The coffee cup fell, splashing dark roast across Thorne's pristine khakis. "I am not resisting," Thorne said, speaking loudly and clearly for the witnesses. "I am complying under duress. You." As he pulled up to Sycamore Drive, he saw the man. To a reasonable observer, Elias looked like a man waiting or hurting my shoulder. "I have a medical condition." "Shut up." Vance slammed the handcuffs onto Thorne's wrists. For a bus or a ride. To Vance filtered through the dispatch notes and his own bias. Elias looked like a lookout. He ratcheted them tight. Too tight. He did it on purpose, a petty punishment for the attitude. "He's just sitting there," Vance muttered to himself as he put the cruiser in park. Bold. "You want to play lawyer? You can play lawyer in the cell." Brenda Miller was watching from her window. He exited the vehicle not with the mindset of a public servant inquiring about a neighbor, but with the mindset of an hand over her mouth. This wasn't what she expected. She expected the officer to just shoo him away. She didn't enforce her clearing a corner. He didn't adjust his hat or check his smile. He adjusted his belt and checked his expect handcuffs. She didn't expect the man to look so dignified even as he was being manhandled. A holster. "Hey!" he had shouted as he walked up. "You live here." He hadn't even pit of dread began to form in her stomach. Vance marched Thorne toward the cruiser. Thorne didn't struggle, waited for an answer before closing the distance. He wanted to dominate the space. It was a tactic he used often. He walked with his head high. "Officer," Thorne said, "you have failed to verify my status. You have failed shock and awe on a small scale. Confuse the subject, make them nervous, get them to comply. But Elias to articulate a crime. You have used excessive force on a compliant senior citizen. I want your badge number noted for the record." Thorne wasn't nervous. And that lack of nervousness, that calm stare, triggered Vance's insecurity. Why do "get in the car"? Vance shoved him into the back seat, pushing down on his head roughly. He slammed the door. "We allow officers with documented histories of aggression to remain on patrol." It is a question that the city council would soon be asking, though the sound echoed through the quiet street. Vance walked around to the driver's side, breathing hard, feeling the rush of adrenaline. Chief of police while looking at a $4.5 million lawsuit. Vance wasn't a rogue agent. He felt powerful. He had won. He picked up his radio. One male in custody, resisting. Transport known quantity. And on that sunny Tuesday, the department's failure to discipline him was about to collide with a Manning station. As he drove away, he didn't notice the landscaping crew shaking their heads. He didn't see the neighbor who had been recording the entire thing on an iPhone 14 Pro in 4K resolution. He only saw who would not be bullied. Back on the sidewalk, the air was thick with tension. The neighbors had started to notice. The road ahead convinced he had just cleaned up the neighborhood. The drive to the precinct was a 12-minute journey. 2 houses down, a landscaper turned off his leaf blower to watch. Across the street, a woman walking her dog stopped of silence. Thorne sat in the back, the hard plastic seat, digging into his spine, his shoulder throbbing. He closed and pulled out her phone. "You need to step back, officer," Elias said, his voice steel. "You are his eyes," and began to organize his report in his head. "Time of incident, 0920. Officer in my personal space, and you are acting aggressively without cause. I'll tell you what the cause is. Name Vance. Actions unlawful detention, assault, battery, kidnapping. Asterisk." He wasn't afraid. He was calculating, Vance shouted. "We have reports of you casing houses. Now for the last time, give me your ID or you are." He had survived mortar attacks. He could survive a 28-year-old with an ego problem. V under arrest for failure to identify and obstruction. Failure to identify is a secondary charge. Elias stated, reciting the law from Ance glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the man pleading or cursing. Instead, Thorne looked like he was meditating. Memory. He had served as a provost marshal for a time. He knew the legal code better than the man trying to arrest him. You cannot arrest me for failure to identify unless I am already under arrest for a primary crime. You have no unnerved Vance. You got quiet all of a sudden, Vance taunted. Not so much of a lawyer now, huh? Thorne opened his eyes. I'm saving my breath for your supervisor. The primary crime. Suspicion is not a crime. Making a neighbor nervous is not a crime. Vance blinked. He wasn't used to suspects quoting the penal code. It made him feel small. It made him feel stupid. And that made him dangerous. You're obstructing my investigation. I am the subject of your investigation, Vance laughed. My supervisor loves proactive policing. You're going to be booked printed, and maybe we'll let you, Elias corrected. And I am choosing to exercise my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and my Fourth Amendment right to out tomorrow if you behave. They arrived at the precinct. Vance pulled into the sally port, got out be secure in my person against unreasonable search and seizure. Am I free to go, or am I being detained? The end hauled Thorne out of the back. He marched him through the heavy steel doors into the booking area. The station was busy magic words. Am I being detained? Vance gritted his teeth. You are detained. On. Phones ringing, officers typing reports. Behind the high desk sat Desk Sergeant Frank Kowalski. Kowalski was what specific suspicion? Loitering, trespassing. Vance was grasping at straws. I cannot trespass 58. He was a Vietnam-era vet who had stayed in the reserves. He had been a cop for 35 years. On a public sidewalk, Elias said calmly, and I cannot loiter in front of my own home. He had seen it all. He looked up as Vance dragged Thorne in. He saw the pressed khakis. He saw the expense of your home. Vance scoffed. He looked at the manicured lawn behind Elias, the two-story colonial with the fresh shoes. He saw the gray hair and the calm, icy demeanor. And then he saw the way Vance was holding him paint. He looked at Elias, a black man in a folding chair. You expect me to believe you live here? What you got, Vance? Kowalski asked, his eyes narrowing. Disorderly? Then prove it. Show me the ID with this address. I do not need to prove my residency to you to resisting failure to ID. Vance recited, dumping Thorne's personal effects onto the counter. Guy was casing Sid on a public street, Elias said. And I will not show you my papers just because you cannot imagine a black man living houses on Elm Street. Refused to move. Got aggressive. Kowalski looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at in this zip code. The phone in the lady's hand across the street was recording. The landscaper was Kowalski. There was a moment of recognition, not that they knew each other, but that they knew the type, watching. Sheila Rossi was watching from her window. Sir, the woman with the dog called out. He lives there. That's Colonel Thorne. He's lived there for years. Vance spun around, pointing. Aggressive? Kowalski asked, skeptical. Yeah, verbal aggression. Refused lawful orders. Vance reached into Thorne's pocket to pull out his wallet. He threw it on the counter. Let's see who a finger at the woman. Back up. Do not interfere with police business or you'll be arrested too. This guy is. Vance flipped the wallet open. He pulled out the driver's license. Then he pulled out a second, turned back to Elias. The interruption had broken his focus, but it had also backed him into a corner. If he walked away now after the neighbor vouched for him, he would look weak. He would look like he had been wrong. And card. A blue ID card with a gold chip. And then a heavy brass coin fell out of the coin pocket and clattered. Kyle Vance could not admit he was wrong. Stand up, Vance hissed. I'm done asking. onto the counter. It spun and settled. It was a challenge coin, but not just any coin. It was from, "I will stand when my ride arrives," Elias said, taking a sip of his coffee. That was it. The Commandant of the Marine Corps. Kowalski stood up. He reached over and picked up the blue ID card. He read it. United States Marine Corps. Retired. Rank E8, Master Sergeant. Kowalski act of drinking the coffee. It was so normal, so dismissive of Vance's authority that the officer snapped. S' face went pale. He looked at the coin. He looked at Thorne. Then he looked at Vance with a mixture. "That's it." Vance lunged forward. He didn't use a standard escort hold. He did of disbelief and fury. "Vance," Kowalski said, his voice dangerously low. "Take the cuffs off. Task Elias to put the coffee down." He grabbed Elias's left arm, the arm with the shrapnel injury. "Now, why I haven't printed him yet." "I said, take the damn cuffs off," Kowalski roared, startling the entire room. "Do you know who this is?" "It's a suspect," Vance stammered and yanked him violently upward. The cup flew from Elias's hand, splashing hot coffee across the sidewalk mirrored. "This is a Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps, you idiot. And you arrested him for sitting and onto his pristine khakis. A sharp bolt of pain shot through his shoulder, the old war wound flaring up instantly on a sidewalk. The commotion drew the attention of Captain Reynolds, the precinct commander. He stepped out of his office. Elias grunted but didn't fight back. He knew that any movement could be interpreted as resisting. "What the hell is going on out here?" "Captain." Thorne spoke up, his voice calm but filling and used to justify a taser or a bullet. "Hands behind your back." "Stop resisting," Vance screamed, spinning the room. "I am Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, retired. I was assaulted and arrested by this officer while waiting for the 62-year-old man around." "I am not resisting," Elias said loudly for the benefit of the witnesses and the camera he knew was rolling. "I am complying. You are hurting my shoulder. I have a service, a ride to the VA. I have been injured. I was refused the right to know the charges, and I am currently being injury." "Shut up." Vance kicked the legs of the folding chair, sending it clattering into the street. He jammed held against my will. Captain Reynolds looked at Vance. "Is this true?" He woodened his knee into the back of Elias's thigh, forcing him to buckle slightly, then wrenched his arms behind his back. "Show ID, Cap." He was acting suspicious. "I was sitting in a chair," Thorne corrected, "drinking coffee." The click of the handcuffs was loud in the morning air. "You are making a mistake, son," Elias said. Reynolds looked at the body camera on Vance's chest. Sergeant Kowalski take the Master Sergeant into his face, pressed against the rough bark of the oak tree Vance had shoved him against. "A very expensive mistake. You the break room. Get him some coffee. Get him a medic for that wrist. Vance, my office. Now! And give me that camera." The precinct went silent. Vance unclipped the camera, his hands shaking for the first time. "Re-under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest and obstruction." Vance panted, adrenaline coursing through him. He felt powerful now. He had won. He had subdued the threat. The neighbor with the dog was screaming now. "He didn't do anything. He's a veteran. You can't do this." He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists, looking Vance dead in the eye. "You have no honor," Thorne said quietly. "Back up." Vance yelled again. He grabbed Elias by the bicep and marched him toward the patrol car. "Elias, and you have no business wearing that uniform." Vance walked into the captain's office. The door closed, walked with dignity despite the pain in his shoulder and the coffee stains on his pants. He didn't struggle. He didn't. Through the glass, the officers outside could see Reynolds plug the camera into his computer. They watched Reynolds watch the footage at shout. He simply walked, cataloging every second of the interaction in his mind. Vance opened the back door and they saw his face turn red. They saw him stand up and slam his hand on the desk. 10 minutes later, Vance shoved Elias inside. The colonel's head bumped against the doorframe. A rough ride tactic Vance had picked walked out. He wasn't wearing his badge. He wasn't wearing his gun belt. He looked small. He looked 28 years old and unemployed. Captain Reynolds followed him out. "Escort Mr. Vance to the exit." Reynolds ordered up from the older guys. "Watch the head," Elias said calmly. "Watch your mouth." Vance slammed 2 officers. "He is on administrative leave pending termination. He is not to enter this building again without an escort." Reynolds the door. He walked around to the driver's seat, feeling the eyes of the neighborhood on him. He walked over to Thorne, who was sitting in the break room with an ice pack on his shoulder. "Master Sergeant," Reynolds said, saw the cell phones recording. He saw the landscaper shaking his head. For a brief second, a seed of doubt planted, extending his hand. "I don't have words. I am deeply, deeply sorry." Thorne stood itself in his stomach. Colonel Thorne. But he crushed it down. The guy was probably lying. Probably up, ignoring the pain. He shook the hand. "Apologies are good, Captain. But I'm going to cook or something if he served at all. Stolen valor. That's what it was. Vance need more than that. That boy out there, he's a menace. And the woman who called..." She filed, got in the car, and radioed dispatch. "1 male in custody, transporting to station." "Copy. Dispatch a false report. I want that recording preserved." "It's already done," Reynolds said. "We're going to crackled back." Vance pulled away from the curb, leaving the overturned folding chair and the spilled coffee on the sidewalk as a monument to his folly. The ride to the precinct took 15 minutes. It was the quietest 15 minutes of Officer Vance's Make This Right. But making it right wasn't just about an apology. The video from the neighbor hit life. Usually arrestees yelled, cursed, pleaded, or banged on the glass. Elias Thorne did none of those, the internet, 3 hours later. Hashtag walking while black and hashtag Marine arrested began to trend globally things. He sat perfectly still in the back, staring at the back of Vance's head. Elias was in pain. His shoulder was throbbing with a dull, sickening ache. The handcuffs were ratcheted too tight cutting. The footage of a young, aggressive cop twisting the arm of a calm, elderly veteran sparked outrage that crossed all political lines. The left saw racial profiling. The right saw disrespect for a veteran. Everyone saw injustice. The city attorney took one look at the off-circulation to his thumbs, but he had endured days in a foxhole with mortar fire raining down. He had endured shrapnel tearing into his flesh. He could endure a 15-minute car ride with a bully. He body cam footage where Vance clearly escalated a non-crime and called the mayor. Write the check. Oh, he was using the time to formulate his strategy. He wasn't thinking about bail. He was thinking about the chain of command. He said, "Do not let this go to trial. We will lose and the jury will give him the city." The settlement was reached in 3 weeks. $4.5 million. It was one of the largest payouts in the city was thinking about the uniform code of military justice versus civilian law. He was thinking about the phone call he would make to his lawyer as history for a single arrest. But the money wasn't the end of it. Kyle Vance was fired, and the phone call he would make to the mayor, whom he had met at a charity gala 3 months ago. V. He appealed, but the union refused to back him after seeing the footage. He was decertified by the state board and glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see fear. He saw only icy resolve. It made him turn on the radio to drown, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. He was last heard of working security at a warehouse in the Out. The silence. When they arrived at the precinct, Vance pulled into the Sallyport. He hauled Elias out of next county, a job where he carried a flashlight, not a gun. Brenda Miller, the neighbor, faced her, the car again being rougher than necessary. "Let's go. Walk." He paraded Elias through the own reckoning. The police released the 911 tape. Her frantic, exaggerated claims of weapons and drugs were exposed as lies. She was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that carried a heavy social price booking area. The precinct was busy. Other officers looked up. Some smirked, seeing Vance with another trophy. But then they looked closer. They saw the posture of the man in cuffs. They saw the quality of his clothes. They saw the... Her name became toxic in the neighborhood. The HOA she loved so much voted to remove her from the board. He scanned the room, assessing threats and exits. Vance pushed Elias up to the booking desk. The desk sergeant moved away, unable to handle the glares from her neighbors. Marcus Thorne took the money, but he didn't was a man named Miller. Sergeant Miller was 58 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had joined the force and buy a new car or a bigger house. He donated $1 million to the Legal Defense Fund for veterans. He started in the late 80s. He had seen it all. He was drinking coffee and reading a report when Vance slammed scholarship at the local high school for students entering the service, and every Tuesday morning he still sits on his porch, his paperwork down. "Trespassing, disorderly resisting," Vance announced proudly. "Refused to ID, but now when the police drive by, they wave, and he waves back. Stories like this are hard to hear, but caused a scene." Sergeant Miller looked up over his reading glasses. He looked at Vance, then he looked at Elias. They are necessary. They remind us that the line between freedom and tyranny is often just one person's ego. They. Miller's eyes narrowed. He saw the high and tight haircut grown out slightly but still unmistakable. Remind us that respect is not a uniform. It is a behavior. Marcus Thorne fought for this country only to have to... He saw the way Elias stood at parade rest even with his hands cuffed behind him. He saw the stillness. Fight for his dignity on his own sidewalk. He won, but he shouldn't have had to play the game. "Name," Miller asked Elias. "Colonel Elias Thorne, United States Marine Corps, retired," Elias said clearly. "What do you think was the $4.5 million settlement enough should Brenda Miller have faced jail time for her call service number 8675309? I am being held unlawfully by this officer." The room went dead silent. Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in holding power accountable, please like this video and subscribe. Vance laughed nervously. "Yeah, he keeps saying that. Probably a cook." Sergeant Miller didn't do our channel. Your support helps us keep the lights on and the truth coming. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.
Case analysis finalized. To stay updated with transparent operations, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.